Sweyn Forkbeard was King of England for less than 2 months during the winter of 1013 to 14. He sat on the English throne for just 41 days. Nevertheless, he was a King of England, so in this video we'll take a close look at his life and how he ended up on the throne. First, let's take a look at where he sits on our Kings and Queens timeline. Here he is, reigning just over 1,000 years ago, 545 years before the Virgin Queen Elizabeth I was crowned. Sweyn was born in around 960 in Denmark, so he would have been in his early 50s when he conquered England and ruled. His father, Harald Bluetooth, was the King of Denmark at the time of his birth. When Sweyn was about 10 years old, the King of Norway, Harald Greycloak, was assassinated, and Harald Bluetooth was able to muscle his way into becoming King of Norway too. Harald Bluetooth is known as one of the first reigning Scandinavian kings to be baptised as a Christian, and Sweyn is thought to have grown up in his father's royal court. When he was in his mid-20s, presumably in the mid to late 980s, Sweyn rose up against his dad, deposed him, and seized the throne. Harald was driven into exile and died shortly after this humiliation. As mentioned in our previous video on Ethelred the Unready, Sweyn Forkbeard invaded England partly on account of his sister Gunhilda. For many decades during the reign of King Ethelred, Viking raiders had harassed the English. Previous kings of England had battled hard to rid England of Viking raiders and Danish settlers. But instead of fighting them off, King Ethelred tried to bribe them into leaving his kingdom in peace. To that end, he parted with tens of thousands of pounds worth of gold and jewels, worth many millions in today's money, a course of action which mysteriously seems only to have encouraged the Vikings to carry out more and more raids. Perhaps frustrated with the futility of his plan, Ethelred appears to have snapped, and in 1002 ordered his men to murder all Danish people living in England. This became known as the St. Brice's Day Massacre. Thousands of innocent people are thought to have been killed, among them Sweyn Forkbeard's little sister Gunhilda, who was living in England at the time, having married an ealdorman in Devon. Possibly in retaliation, over the next decade, Sweyn launched a series of raids on England, and in 1013, having already extracted a huge amount of gold and jewels from these raids, he launched a full-scale invasion of England. Sweyn and his invading army swept through the country, forcing the ruling King of England, Ethelred, into exile in Normandy. Incredibly, it's possible to say that Ethelred the Unready funded his own hostile takeover. On Christmas Day 1013, Sweyn was crowned King of England. Basing himself in Lincolnshire, he set about organising his new kingdom, but just 41 days into his reign, he keeled over and died. His body was returned to Denmark where it was buried, possibly in Lund, located in southern Sweden. His eldest son Harald was declared King of Denmark, and his younger son Canute was proclaimed King of England. However, Canute was driven from England, and the nobility there welcomed back their exiled king, Ethelred. As we saw in our previous video, Ethelred only lasted another 2 years before he himself died. Sweyn's reign, though short, was extremely significant in the history of England. Ethelred's decision to pay the Vikings off and then order the St. Brice's Day Massacre was a course of action that, it could be argued, ultimately enabled the eventual Norman invasion. It's worth asking the question, what would have happened if Ethelred had fought the Vikings instead of paying them off? Had he fought them, it's possible they might have been discouraged from attacking. As it was, they had a financial incentive to come back over and over again. Ethelred would have had less of a reason to lash out by ordering the St. Brice's Day Massacre. This may well have stopped Sweyn Forkbeard seeking revenge for his sister's murder. Ethelred would also have had less of a reason to seek out a political union with Normandy by marrying Emma, his second wife. Aligning with the Normans at this time via a political marriage not only ensured raiding Vikings were given no support there, it also provided Ethelred with some valuable allies and a place to hide if things got too sticky for him. However, this marriage tied Ethelred, and thus the crown of England, to Normandy. Emma and Ethelred's union also produced a son, Edward, who would later become King of England and become known as Edward the Confessor. It was Edward who supposedly promised the English throne to a young outsider, the would-be Norman invader, William I, later William the Conqueror, who would obliterate the Anglo-Saxon line and set England on an entirely different historical course. Even without that promise, Ethelred's marriage to Emma possibly could have given William I a reason to think he was entitled to rule England. Aside from all that, if Sweyn had never been King of England, his second son, Canute, would not have had a claim to the English throne. Instead, as we'll find out in later videos, Canute came back to England and eventually ruled successfully as king. For a more detailed summary of what might have happened without Sweyn, watch our previous video on Ethelred the Unready. In the next video, we'll take a look at the king that came after Ethelred and Sweyn, Ethelred's son, Edmund Ironside, who was King of England for just 7 months in 1016. Please hit the subscribe button below to receive an alert when we upload our next video. You can also help us to keep making these videos by supporting us via Patreon. See the link below.